The palace was quieter than usual. Too quiet, some aides whispered. But in that silence, something monumental was brewing. Something that would shake not just the walls of Buckingham, but the entire world. What you are about to hear isn't speculation. These are events that insiders have confirmed. The question is, are you ready for the truth? Because what happened behind closed doors has never been revealed to the public until now. Imagine this. The head of a monarchy, a king, in declining health, sitting in the grandest room of one of the most famous palaces in the world, while his son, the heir, prepares for a moment he never imagined would come so soon. The tension, the secrecy, the anticipation, it was all there, hidden behind layers of ceremony and decorum. But the cracks were showing, and those cracks were about to split open in ways no one expected. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It began with small signs, almost imperceptible to the casual observer. A canceled appearance here, a meeting cut short there. The media chalked it up to routine fatigue, but the people inside the palace knew better. Something was off. King Charles had been under immense pressure, both physically and emotionally, and the strain was showing. But what really sent shockwaves through the corridors of power was not just the illness. It was the realization that the unthinkable was now possible: abdication. Abdication is rare in any monarchy. It is a decision fraught with tradition, expectation, and personal sacrifice. The last British king to voluntarily give up the throne was Edward VIII, almost a century ago, and the ripple effects were enormous. But King Charles, facing declining health and a family torn between duty and ambition, was staring down the very same path. Could he step away? And if he did, who would be ready to take the crown in a world that demanded both stability and charisma? Prince William, the heir apparent, had been preparing his entire life for this moment, though he would never admit it publicly. Inside, he knew that the mantle could fall at any time, and he had been quietly observing, learning, waiting. But readiness is a complex thing. It isn't just about knowledge or protocol. It's about psychology, emotion, and a deep understanding of responsibility. And the question everyone was asking, but no one dared speak aloud, was William truly ready to step into the role his father might abandon? The palace had changed, imperceptibly but unmistakably. Guards' routines were altered, staff whispered in corners, and advisors met in rooms behind locked doors. Something was being planned. Something that no one outside that inner circle could possibly understand. And while the world remained oblivious, insiders were acting with urgency, mapping out scenarios, preparing statements, rehearsing the inevitable. Yet there was another side to this story. While health concerns were real, some argue that the decision was as much political as personal. Charles's reign had been under scrutiny, his popularity fluctuating with the tides of public opinion, and the monarchy itself faced unprecedented challenges. Social change, media scrutiny, and political pressure were converging, creating a moment where stepping down might not just be about illness. It might be about survival, both personal and institutional. And if the king stepped aside, the weight of expectation would fall squarely on William's shoulders. Could he bear it? But William's readiness was not just about him. It was about the people around him. His family, his advisors, his wife, Kate. Everyone would have to adapt to this new reality. And as history has shown, transitions of power are rarely smooth. Behind closed doors, tempers flare, loyalties are tested, and decisions made in moments of stress can have consequences that echo for generations. Let's pause for a moment and consider the stakes. For the public, a royal abdication might seem like a historical footnote, a ceremonial curiosity. But in reality, this was seismic. The monarchy isn't just a symbol. It's a complex network of tradition, duty, politics, and public perception. Every action reverberates across the Commonwealth and beyond. The implications of a king stepping down are not theoretical. They are tangible, immediate, and potentially explosive. Insiders reported that Charles had been meeting with advisors more frequently than ever before, sometimes in private late-night sessions that lasted hours. These meetings weren't about public appearances or charitable initiatives. They were about contingency plans, emergency protocols, and the psychological readiness of the heir. And William, though calm on the surface, was absorbing it all, weighing every possibility. calculating every risk. Every pause, every glance, every sentence mattered. The public, of course, had no idea. To them, the palace maintained its polished image. The Queen Mother's legacy lingered in tradition, ceremonies continued on schedule, and official statements remained vague, carefully crafted to maintain an aura of stability. But beneath that veneer, a drama of monumental proportions was unfolding. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because while health concerns were the catalyst, there was another layer. A hidden tension between father and son, rooted in decades of preparation, expectation, and the weight of legacy. Charles had always known that one day William would inherit the throne, but not like this. Not under such fraught circumstances. And William, for his part, had grown into the role of future king with patience and discretion. Yet even he could not anticipate the challenges, the tests of loyalty, or the subtle maneuvering that would define this historic moment. Questions swirled within the palace walls. Who could be trusted? Which allies were truly loyal, and which had agendas of their own? How would the public react to an abdication announcement? How would the media spin it? And how would politicians respond? These questions were not abstract. They were immediate, pressing, and unrelenting. And the answers, insiders suggest, were being crafted in secret, far from the public eye. The anticipation reached a fever pitch when a cryptic message was reportedly sent to select members of the royal household. Be ready. Changes are coming. That was all it said. Simple, direct, terrifying in its implications. Some dismissed it as routine caution. Others, who understood the inner workings of the palace, recognized it for what it was, a signal that the unimaginable was on the horizon. For the audience watching this unfold, it might be tempting to think this is just another royal saga, another headline. But the stakes here are different. This isn't about scandal or gossip. This is about leadership, legacy, and the delicate balance between duty and personal choice. And the world was about to witness a decision that would redefine the monarchy for generations. As the days passed, subtle changes became impossible to ignore. Security protocols shifted. Public appearances were modified or canceled. Advisors spoke in hushed tones. And Prince William, usually the composed and reserved figure, displayed a quiet determination that did not go unnoticed. He was preparing, not for a ceremonial role, but for a life-defining responsibility that would test every fiber of his being. And yet, for all this preparation, no one could predict the exact moment the announcement would come. Would it be a carefully orchestrated public statement? A sudden, shocking revelation to the world? Or something even more dramatic, whispered in private before reaching the media? The tension was unbearable, and every insider knew that when the moment came, nothing would be the same again. So what does this all mean for you, the observer, the audience? It means you are about to witness the story behind the story, the moments that were never televised, the conversations that never appeared in newspapers, the strategic decisions, emotional struggles, and personal dilemmas that shaped one of the most dramatic transitions in modern royal history. It all started with what the world thought was nothing: a canceled public appearance, a short, seemingly routine statement from Buckingham Palace about the king needing to rest for health reasons. To the casual observer, it was trivial, but insiders knew better. This was the first crack in the armor, a subtle signal that something far bigger was underway. On that morning, aides arrived at Clarence's house to find an atmosphere thick with tension. Security personnel moved with unusual urgency. Courtiers whispered in corners. Staff exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Something had shifted. The king, normally meticulous and regimented, appeared distracted. His schedule, once rigidly predictable, now contained gaps that could not be explained by illness alone. There was a restlessness in the air, a nervous energy that suggested anticipation, fear, and the weight of an unspoken decision. William was present, though mostly silent, observing. He understood what the aides did not yet fully grasp. The moment had arrived where the theoretical could become reality. He had trained for years for public duties, for state events, for ceremonial obligations, but the throne itself? That was a different weight entirely. And he could feel it pressing in, a gravity that demanded not just readiness, but clarity of purpose and resolve. On that day, a small meeting took place that the press would never know about. It wasn't in the public schedule, nor did it leave any official record. Only a handful of trusted advisors attended. The discussion was direct and unflinching. The king's health was deteriorating faster than anyone wanted to admit. Options were limited. Choices had to be made, and swiftly. Every possible scenario was laid out, from a controlled abdication to an emergency succession plan. Every option carried risk, personal, political, and public. One advisor, known for his stoic demeanor, reportedly leaned forward and said, "Your Majesty, if we wait any longer, we may lose control of the narrative entirely. The public and the media will force our hand." It was a warning wrapped in urgency. Another suggested a gradual transition, one that would soften the blow but extend the uncertainty. But Charles, exhausted, weighed the options with the heavy knowledge that every day brought new complications, both for him and for the monarchy he had long served. Meanwhile, William observed silently. His role was unclear at the time. Should he step in, offer guidance, or wait until the king made the first move? The answer was not simple. William had spent decades preparing for this exact moment. Yet preparation alone could not account for the human element, the emotional toll of assuming ultimate responsibility for a nation, a family, and centuries of tradition. He knew the world was watching, even if it didn't realize it yet. And in that moment, the first seeds of his public readiness began to take root. But it wasn't just the inner circle that noticed the tension. Outside the palace walls, subtle signs hinted at change. News outlets picked up on small anomalies. Cancelled events, a rare public absence, cryptic statements from spokespeople. Theories circulated, ranging from temporary illness to deeper political maneuvers. Few guessed the truth. The monarchy itself was at a tipping point, and the first signs had already emerged. Adding to the complexity was the human element within the family. Charles's relationship with William was always layered with affection, expectation, and occasionally unspoken tension. In private, the two shared conversations that were intimate yet strategic. Charles would test William's patience, probing his understanding of duty, loyalty, and the responsibilities that came with the crown. William, in turn, measured his responses carefully, aware that every word might influence the next step in this unfolding drama. And then there was the moment that insiders describe as pivotal. A late-night conversation between Charles and William took place in the king's private study. No one else was present. The air was heavy with unspoken truths. Charles, frail but resolute, reportedly said, "I need to know you're ready, William. Not just for duty, but for everything it entails." William's reply was simple, yet loaded with conviction. "I am ready, Father. Whatever comes, I will do what is necessary." The exchange, though brief, signaled the first real acknowledgement that an abdication could occur, that the mantle of responsibility was poised to pass. At the same time, tensions in other corners of the palace were mounting. Senior courtiers debated protocol, younger staff speculated on outcomes, and external advisors weighed in on the optics of a sudden transition. The palace itself, a centuries-old institution, seemed almost to sense the seismic change. Every corridor, every room, every silent hallway carried the weight of anticipation. Yet, despite all these signs, the public remained largely unaware. Television cameras continued to broadcast the usual ceremonial events, and the monarchy's official communications were carefully measured, projecting stability. This was a deliberate strategy. The last thing the palace wanted was panic or speculation that could destabilize not just the monarchy, but the nation itself. Control of the narrative was paramount, and every insider understood that a single leak could spark chaos. It is also worth noting the irony of the situation. Charles, who had spent decades cultivating his public image and preparing for a reign of stability, now found himself in a scenario that tested every principle he had upheld. And William, ever measured and cautious, faced a paradox. He had been trained to lead, groomed for public life, yet the very real prospect of assuming the crown under fraught circumstances brought uncertainty that no preparation could erase. Adding further drama was the role of Kate, whose influence behind the scenes cannot be overstated. She was not merely a bystander. She was a stabilizing presence, providing guidance, emotional support, and strategic insight. Insiders suggest that she subtly steered conversations, ensured communication channels remained open, and, most importantly, helped William navigate the complex emotional landscape of his emerging role. Her presence added a humanizing layer to an otherwise highly formal and tense environment. By the end of that first day, the day insiders now call the moment the world missed, a few critical realizations had solidified. First, the king's health was undeniably a factor that could not be ignored. Second, William's readiness was being tested in real time, with every conversation, every observation, every strategic decision pushing him closer to the inevitable. And third, the palace itself was entering uncharted territory. For centuries, transitions of power had followed established protocol, but now, everything was in flux, and the stakes had never been higher. The day closed with a sense of quiet, almost deceptive calm. To the casual observer, it appeared routine. But those who understood the inner workings of the monarchy knew that something monumental had just begun. The first domino had fallen, and the chain reaction was unstoppable. What happened next would set in motion events that no one, not even the most seasoned royal observers, could have anticipated. And so, the first sign, a simple, seemingly inconsequential cancellation, was, in fact, the spark that ignited an entire chain of events. It was a reminder that history often unfolds not in grand gestures, but in quiet, almost invisible moments that, in hindsight, are unmistakable. The palace, the king, the heir. All were now poised on the brink of a historic transformation. The night was unusually still, the kind of quiet that presses down and makes even the most seasoned staff feel a twinge of unease. Clarence's house, usually alive with the muted hum of activity, doors opening, footsteps in the hallways, whispered instructions, was eerily calm. Only a select few had been summoned, and each person who arrived understood, instinctively, that the meeting they were about to attend was unlike any they had ever been part of. Inside the private drawing room, King Charles waited. He was composed, but there was a tension in the set of his shoulders, a weight behind his eyes that spoke volumes. Those who had known him for decades recognized it immediately. This was a man at a crossroads, aware that history was watching, yet uncertain of the path ahead. The room was small by royal standards, intimate, forcing a closeness that made avoidance impossible. Every word spoken here would carry significance far beyond these walls. The attendees were few, handpicked for trustworthiness, discretion, and experience. Among them were senior advisors, a private secretary, a key legal counsel, and a figure representing the palace's communications team. No one else was allowed. Cameras, phones, and recording devices were strictly prohibited. This was not a meeting for documentation. It was a meeting for decisions, and those decisions could not leave the room. From the outset, the tone was urgent. One advisor spoke first, a voice steady but heavy with concern. "Your Majesty, the situation is pressing. Your health has become unpredictable. We must consider contingencies that, until now, were theoretical." Charles nodded slowly, his hands clasped in front of him. "I am aware," he replied quietly, "but urgency does not erase responsibility. I must be certain that any course of action protects not just my family, but the institution itself." The conversation quickly turned to scenarios, detailed, unflinching scenarios that outline the consequences of each possible choice. Abdication, though historically rare, was no longer a distant possibility. It was imminent. They discussed timelines, public perception, and the sequence of announcements that would preserve the dignity of the monarchy while addressing the unavoidable reality of Charles's declining health. Every detail was scrutinized, from the wording of statements to the order in which aides would be briefed. What made this meeting particularly tense, insiders revealed, was the acknowledgement of human factors. The monarchy is not only a system of tradition and protocol. It is a network of emotions, ambitions, and loyalties. Who might resist? Who might leak sensitive information? Who could be swayed or persuaded? Every participant in the room understood that the delicate equilibrium of trust within the royal household was as crucial as any legal consideration. One misstep could ignite public scandal, and no one wanted that. Then came the discussion of William. The room shifted subtly, as if the air itself had changed. The advisors knew, and Charles knew, that the question of the heir's readiness was central to the meeting. "William must be prepared," Charles said, his voice measured but firm. "He cannot simply follow protocol. He must embody it. He must understand the weight of every decision, every word, every public glance." William's role in this meeting was complex. Though present, he was not dominating the conversation. He listened, absorbing the gravity of each statement, analyzing the strategies being proposed. Observers later described his demeanor as calm, almost serene, but insiders knew better. Every fiber of him was engaged, calculating, understanding not only the practicalities of succession but also the emotional implications, the sacrifices, the expectations, and the potential fallout. The meeting continued for hours. Advisors debated nuances, the phrasing of official communications, the timing of public statements, and contingency plans for unforeseen complications. Legal counsel emphasized the constitutional implications. Communications experts highlighted the risk of misinterpretation by the press. Each topic was approached meticulously, reflecting both the high stakes and the complexity of the monarchy in the modern era. Yet, beneath the formal discussion, a subtler, more personal dynamic unfolded. Charles and William exchanged glances that carried unspoken messages. Trust, caution, affection, and the heavy weight of legacy intertwined. William's response to every suggestion was thoughtful, measured, and deliberate. He demonstrated not only comprehension of protocol, but also an instinctive understanding of leadership, the kind that cannot be taught, only lived. And Charles, in turn, observed his son with a mixture of pride and apprehension, recognizing both readiness and the inevitability of change. Kate's influence, though indirect, was evident in the room. She had advised William privately in preparation for this moment, helping him anticipate the questions, the concerns, and the emotional complexities that would arise. Though she did not speak at the meeting, her presence was felt. In William's poise, in his clarity, and in the way he approached the discussions with both intelligence and empathy. The meeting reached a critical turning point when one advisor, usually calm and impartial, raised the question of timing. "Your Majesty, if the decision is to proceed with abdication, we must consider the exact moment. A delay could be misread, and an early announcement could provoke instability. The public narrative must be controlled precisely." Charles considered this, silent for a long moment. The gravity of the words weighed on everyone in the room. Here, in this small drawing room, history was being decided. And then, a revelation emerged. One participant disclosed that a potential leak had already reached a journalist sympathetic to the palace, a rare occurrence. The risk of public exposure, accidental or intentional, had suddenly become a pressing threat. This revelation added urgency. Every advisor recognized that control of the story was paramount. If the narrative was dictated by speculation, the monarchy could be damaged irreparably. Every plan they had discussed needed immediate refinement. But perhaps the most dramatic moment occurred when Charles addressed the room directly, his voice steady but heavy. "We are on the edge of a transformation that history will remember. But this is not just a legal or procedural matter. It is deeply personal. My decision will affect my family, the country, and the perception of the monarchy for generations. We must act with wisdom, courage, and absolute discretion." Silence followed. The weight of his words hung in the air. Each person present understood that the meeting was no longer merely advisory. It was a prelude to action. The path forward was being determined, step by step, word by word. And while no one could predict the public reaction, one fact was certain. The monarchy would never be the same again. Outside the room, the palace seemed to hold its breath. Even in the corridors, staff reported a sense of tension that had no visible cause. Every door closed. Every whisper carried significance. Every gesture was scrutinized. The invisible machinery of the monarchy was in motion, and no one dared misstep. By the time the meeting concluded, it was clear that a sequence of events had been set in motion that could not be reversed. Plans had been outlined, responsibilities delegated, and contingency measures prepared. William's readiness had been confirmed, privately, officially, irrevocably. But the question remained. Would the public, and even some members of the royal household, accept the decision when it was finally revealed? And just as the advisors began to leave, one final piece of tension was introduced. A confidential message, drafted earlier in the day, awaited approval. Its contents were explosive, enough to shape public perception and preempt speculation. But Charles hesitated, considering the weight of the decision, the consequences, and the legacy he would leave behind. Every second counted. Every decision mattered. No one outside the palace could have understood the quiet urgency building around King Charles. On the surface, he appeared to maintain the same composure that had defined his public persona for decades. Polished speeches, dignified walks, and carefully choreographed appearances were all part of the performance the public had come to expect. But behind the curtains, reality was far different. Insiders now confirmed that the king's health had taken a noticeable turn, one that would force a reckoning none of them could delay. The first signs were subtle, almost imperceptible. An aide noticed his steps were slower during a routine morning inspection, his posture slightly less erect than usual. During a meeting with senior advisors, he paused mid-sentence, searching for words he would normally deliver with precision and clarity. To the casual observer, these moments could have been attributed to fatigue or the stress of public duties. But to those who had worked alongside Charles for decades, these were warnings, red flags signaling that something more serious was unfolding. A particularly revealing incident occurred during a private lunch with key members of the royal household. Charles, who had always been meticulous about timing and protocol, mismanaged a simple task. A glass of water was knocked over, spilling across the table. It was a minor accident, but the symbolism was stark. Those present sensed the gravity immediately. The king's attention, once razor-sharp, was now vulnerable to lapses. And while he hid it well in public, the palace staff could see the strain etched on his face. Fleeting moments of fatigue, subtle tremors in his hands, a tiredness that no ceremonial duty could mask. What made this period particularly complex was that Charles had long resisted the notion of abdication, viewing it as a last resort. He had envisioned a reign where duty would outweigh personal limitation, where even illness would not dictate his timeline. Yet, reality was relentless. Advisors noted the increased frequency of doctor visits, consultations, and even confidential health reports that raised questions no one dared voice aloud in public. Every assessment painted a picture of vulnerability that could no longer be ignored. Insiders now reveal that at one point, a medical assessment was quietly sent to Clarence House. The report suggested that while the king remained capable of performing his duties, there was an undeniable decline in stamina and resilience. Certain activities that had once been routine were now taxing. Even the simplest events, brief engagements, small ceremonies, required careful planning and recovery periods. It was an inconvenient truth, one that collided head-on with the public's expectation of a consistent, unflappable monarch. This decline had consequences beyond the king himself. It forced a re-evaluation of the succession timeline, the pacing of official events, and the readiness of Prince William. If Charles could not fulfill duties with the expected consistency, William would need to step in, sometimes suddenly, to maintain continuity. That reality added pressure not only to William, who had spent years preparing for his eventual role, but to every layer of the royal household. Each staff member, each advisor, each aide was now acutely aware that every misstep could have cascading consequences. What made the situation particularly tense was the secrecy surrounding it. Public appearances were maintained. Official statements downplayed any health concerns. The palace's communications team worked tirelessly to craft a narrative of stability and continuity, while insiders scrambled to manage the underlying truth. Behind the scenes, the contrast between perception and reality was stark, creating an emotional tension that permeated every corner of the palace. Family dynamics added another layer of complexity. William, aware of the growing fragility of his father, faced a delicate balancing act. He could not appear impatient or opportunistic, yet he had to ensure that plans were in motion should an abdication become necessary. Conversations with his father, though respectful, were carefully calibrated to gauge readiness, assess emotional stability, and subtly guide the discussion toward inevitable decisions. Even Kate played a vital role, offering perspective, calm, and emotional clarity that helped William navigate the psychological strain of this period. Meanwhile, Whispers began circulating among palace insiders that Charles had considered alternatives to abdication. There were discussions of delegating responsibilities temporarily, adjusting the public schedule, or even attempting a partial retreat from public life. Yet each alternative carried risk. The longer the king delayed a decisive action, the greater the likelihood of missteps, miscommunications, and unforeseen consequences. Every day of delay intensified the pressure, not only on Charles, but on William, whose moment of destiny was arriving faster than anyone had anticipated. One particularly revealing moment came during a late-night briefing. A senior advisor, reflecting on the king's condition, noted a subtle but concerning pattern. Small lapses in memory during conversations, difficulty sustaining focus over extended periods, and fatigue that worsened unpredictably. The observation was delivered discreetly, yet its impact was immediate. Those present understood that these were not minor inconveniences. They were indicators that the time for contingency planning had arrived. Medical experts, brought in for confidential consultations, reportedly recommended an accelerated preparation for succession. Their assessments were clinical, precise, and devoid of sentimentality, yet the implications were profound. They emphasized that while Charles remained capable of fulfilling ceremonial duties, the unpredictable nature of his health could not be ignored. Every advisor, every family member, every staff member understood that the scenario they had feared most was no longer hypothetical. It was imminent. And yet, Charles faced another internal struggle. As king, he had always believed in personal resilience, in the idea that duty should triumph over physical limitation. Abdication, to him, was a deeply personal and emotional decision. It was not simply about health. It was about pride, legacy, and the perception of monarchy. For decades, he had prepared for this role, envisioned a reign that extended uninterrupted, and yet now, the reality of human frailty forced him to consider stepping aside. Meanwhile, William's understanding of the situation deepened. He was forced to reconcile two realities simultaneously: the need to support his father and the inevitability of preparing for a historic transition. The weight of that dual responsibility created a tension that insiders describe as almost palpable. Every interaction, every private conversation, and every decision carried consequences not just for the present, but for the future of the monarchy itself. Kate's presence remained vital. She offered a stabilizing influence, helping William maintain focus and composure even as the stakes escalated. Insiders report that her role extended beyond emotional support. She helped coordinate communication strategies, anticipate public reaction, and navigate the complex interpersonal dynamics within the royal household. In many ways, her quiet influence became a cornerstone of the palace's ability to manage the situation effectively. By the time Charles acknowledged the growing reality of his health concerns, a critical decision loomed. Delay was no longer an option. Advisors, doctors, and family members converged around a single, unavoidable truth. The monarchy needed clarity, and Charles would need to make a decision that would define the next chapter of British history. Every contingency plan, every emergency protocol, every private conversation up to this point had been a prelude to this moment. And then, the turning point. A confidential discussion between Charles and William confirmed what insiders had long suspected. Charles, understanding both the limitations imposed by his health and the obligations of the monarchy, quietly admitted that abdication could no longer be considered unthinkable. William, calm but resolute, reassured his father that he was ready to assume responsibility, prepared to navigate both the ceremonial and emotional challenges that lay ahead. That exchange, intimate and rarely witnessed, marked the first time the inevitability of change had been truly acknowledged. Yet even in that moment, uncertainty lingered. Questions remained about timing, public perception, and internal family dynamics. Every decision carried risk, and the consequences would extend far beyond the palace walls. Insiders knew that while history would remember the abdication itself, the weeks leading up to it, the quiet moments, the private struggles, the hidden decisions, were where the true story lay. While the public continued to see a composed, confident heir apparent, Prince William's private life told a different story. Behind the polished smiles and ceremonial poise, he was preparing for a reality that many assumed was decades away. yet was now accelerating faster than anyone had anticipated. These preparations were not just ceremonial. They were psychological, strategic, and deeply personal, requiring him to navigate a minefield of family dynamics, public expectation, and historical responsibility. William had spent his life learning the mechanics of royalty, protocols, public appearances, speeches, and ceremonies. He knew every nuance of a state banquet, every etiquette rule for international visits, every protocol for greeting dignitaries. But private preparation went beyond formalities. It involved understanding the weight of power, the responsibility of leadership, and the scrutiny of millions. Now, with his father's health deteriorating, the theoretical became urgent. Every day became a masterclass in preparation for the throne, compressed into weeks rather than decades. The first step in William's private preparations was a rigorous review of the monarchy's internal operations. He met in secret with senior advisors who had managed Charles's reign, gaining insight into the delicate balances between public image, media strategy, and internal palace dynamics. These meetings were highly confidential. Even the staff who served the household daily were not fully aware of the scope of his inquiries. He wanted to understand every mechanism, every line of authority, every decision-making process, so that he could step in seamlessly when the time came. He also spent hours with legal counsel, examining the constitutional implications of succession. Though the British monarchy is largely symbolic in governance, the legal responsibilities of the sovereign are not insignificant. William studied the king's formal powers, the documents that govern succession, and the scenarios that could arise if Charles were to abdicate under duress. Every contingency was analyzed, debated, and understood. The stakes were higher than ever, and he could not afford a misstep. At the same time, William focused on his public image. He knew that stepping into the role of king would require both authority and empathy. It was not enough to perform ceremonial duties flawlessly. He needed to inspire confidence, command respect, and maintain the loyalty of the public and the Commonwealth. For this reason, he consulted with image advisors, communication specialists, and former diplomats to refine not only his speeches, but also his demeanor, tone, and body language. Every gesture, every pause, every public interaction would be scrutinized, and he was determined to be ready. Kate played a critical role in these preparations. She was more than a supportive spouse. She was an advisor, strategist, and emotional anchor. Insiders reveal that she helped William navigate the psychological challenges of stepping into a role traditionally steeped in tradition, obligation, and historical weight. She encouraged him to reflect on his values, define his vision for the monarchy, and anticipate the pressures he would face not only from the public, but from within the family itself. Their partnership became a stabilizing force amid the mounting tension inside the palace. But preparation was not confined to strategy and image. William also engaged in deep personal reflection. He considered the legacy of past monarchs, the lessons of his grandparents, and the challenges faced by his father. He thought about the monarchy's role in modern society, the expectations of the public, and the importance of balancing tradition with relevance. These reflections were not theoretical. They were urgent, pressing, and deeply personal. Every decision he made now would shape not only the monarchy but the public's perception of his reign for decades to come. In addition, William conducted discreet meetings with international allies and Commonwealth representatives. Though these interactions were private and unofficial, they allowed him to understand the expectations of global partners, gauge reactions to potential transitions, and ensure continuity of influence in international affairs. Insiders stressed that these conversations were critical. They provided William with the intelligence needed to manage relationships that would impact the monarchy's diplomatic standing. The psychological toll of these preparations cannot be overstated. William faced a unique paradox. He was preparing for a role he had long expected, yet the urgency of the situation added immense pressure. Every conversation, every decision, every late-night consultation brought him closer to the inevitable moment of ascension, and the stakes were higher than ever. Failure was not an option, not for his family, not for the monarchy, and not for the nation watching silently from afar. He also anticipated the emotional challenges. Ascending to the throne under circumstances of a father's declining health would test loyalty, patience, and public perception. William knew that the world would judge every gesture, every comment, every public statement. Even private expressions of emotion could be leaked or misinterpreted. Insiders suggest that he spent hours in private reflection, rehearsing how to balance compassion for his father with the authority expected of a future king. Security and logistics were another critical focus. William reviewed emergency protocols, travel arrangements, and contingency plans for both ceremonial and private transitions. From palace security to transportation logistics, every element had to be understood, rehearsed, and ready. A miscalculation could endanger not only him, but the continuity of the monarchy. He approached these preparations with a methodical intensity that insiders describe as extraordinary, almost relentless. But perhaps the most significant aspect of William's private preparation was understanding human dynamics. He studied the relationships within the royal family, anticipating potential conflicts, misunderstandings, and political maneuvers. He observed how Charles interacted with advisors, family members, and staff, noting subtle shifts in tone, gesture, and decision-making. William realized that leadership was as much about psychology as it was about protocol. To lead effectively, he would need to navigate not only public expectation but also private alliances, loyalties, and tensions. Kate's counsel extended here as well. She helped him anticipate how different family members might respond, guided him in diplomacy, and advised on maintaining unity while asserting authority. Her insights were crucial, ensuring that William approached each interaction with both clarity and tact, balancing respect for tradition with the necessity of decisive action. As days passed, William's preparation intensified. Meetings grew longer, strategy sessions more detailed, and personal reflection deeper. Insiders note that he would often retire late at night, reviewing notes, rehearsing speeches, and mentally simulating scenarios. He understood that the coming transition was not just a ceremonial formality. It was a historic moment that would define the monarchy and his own legacy. And yet, despite all this preparation, uncertainty remained. Charles's health could deteriorate suddenly, political pressures could shift, or unforeseen events could accelerate the timeline. William had trained for years, but training could only go so far. The reality of stepping into the role of king, with all its obligations, scrutiny, and weight, remained both daunting and inescapable. It started as a whisper, a seemingly innocuous comment overheard in a corridor, a casual remark during an unofficial gathering, a vague note left in the wrong hands. At first, it seemed inconsequential, something that the palace staff brushed aside as idle speculation. But within hours, the whisper had grown into a storm, and the consequences would reverberate far beyond the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace. The leak was subtle, yet explosive. A trusted aide, someone with years of service and an impeccable record, inadvertently disclosed information to a journalist. The details were tantalizing yet partial. Hints of King Charles's declining health, speculation about a potential abdication, and, most dramatically, references to Prince William's readiness to assume the throne. Though incomplete, the information was enough to ignite a media frenzy. News outlets, social media platforms, and international press agencies quickly picked up the story, each adding layers of conjecture, analysis, and sensationalism. For the palace, the leak was catastrophic. The institution prides itself on control. Control of information, public perception, and narrative. The monarchy's stability depends on careful management of every announcement, every appearance, every gesture. Suddenly, that control was gone. Information had escaped the inner circle, and the story was now shaping itself in the public domain, untethered from the palace's meticulous planning. Inside the palace, panic was palpable. Advisors scrambled to assess the damage, determine the source, and contain the fallout. Senior officials convened emergency meetings, weighing their options. Every choice carried risk. Denying the leak could fuel suspicion, confirming it could provoke controversy, and ignoring it entirely could allow speculation to spiral beyond control. The delicate balance between transparency and discretion, a balance maintained for centuries, was suddenly at risk of collapse. Charles, who had until now maintained a composed exterior, faced an unprecedented challenge. His private health concerns, which had been carefully managed within the palace, were now subject to public scrutiny. For decades, he had operated under the assumption that personal matters could remain discreet, even if they intersected with royal duties. The leak shattered that assumption. His vulnerabilities, previously known only to close family and advisors, were now fodder for international debate. William's response was swift but measured. He recognized the potential danger of reacting impulsively. He met with his most trusted advisors and strategists, charting a course that would protect both his father's dignity and the integrity of the monarchy. Yet, even as he planned, he understood that the leak had accelerated the timeline. What had been a private preparation had suddenly become a public imperative. The world was watching, and every decision, every public statement, and every gesture would be magnified, dissected, and scrutinized. The leak also revealed the precariousness of internal loyalties. Some staff members, aware of the leak's source, began to question their positions. Who could be trusted? Who might have ulterior motives? In an institution where hierarchy, discretion, and loyalty are paramount, even the slightest breach of trust had seismic consequences. Charles and William both understood that they were navigating a minefield, and any misstep could have personal and political ramifications. Public reaction was immediate. Social media erupted with speculation. Was the king seriously considering abdication? Was William truly ready? How would the public respond to a sudden transition? Commentators analyzed past speeches, public appearances, and even photographs for hidden signs. Every move, every word, every facial expression was dissected for meaning. And in the midst of this frenzy, rumors about the timeline of Charles's potential abdication began circulating, creating both excitement and uncertainty. The leak also tested family dynamics in ways no one anticipated. Charles, traditionally private and disciplined, found himself navigating a new reality where personal vulnerabilities were public. William, who had spent weeks preparing in private, was suddenly thrust into the limelight ahead of schedule. Even Kate, whose influence behind the scenes had been crucial, now faced the added pressure of managing both public perception and private family stability. The royal household, a carefully orchestrated ecosystem, was now responding to external pressure it had never planned for. Insiders reveal that a critical meeting followed immediately after the leak. Charles, William, and a small cadre of advisors convened in a private chamber. The discussion was intense. Charles expressed frustration but also clarity. The leak, while unfortunate, had removed some ambiguity. The palace could no longer delay decisions. The king's health, the timing of succession, and William's readiness were now matters of public awareness. Action, not speculation, would define the next steps. William, calm but resolute, presented his perspective. He emphasized the importance of controlling the narrative, reinforcing his readiness, and maintaining the dignity of the monarchy. He proposed a series of measured public statements, carefully timed and crafted to both reassure the public and respect his father's position. This approach reflected not only his strategic thinking, but also his understanding of the delicate balance between tradition and transparency. What made this moment particularly tense was the realization that the leak had created a new variable: public expectation. The monarchy's long-standing authority depends in part on controlled perception. By spilling partial information into the public domain, the palace had inadvertently invited scrutiny, judgment, and pressure. Every decision from this point forward would be measured against not only legal and procedural norms, but also the court of public opinion. Amid this turmoil, another layer of complexity emerged. Political figures and media analysts began weighing in, offering opinions, predictions, and, in some cases, veiled criticism. While the monarchy is meant to remain politically neutral, the leak blurred the lines. Questions arose about the stability of the crown, the preparedness of William, and the potential impact on the Commonwealth. Every statement made by government officials, journalists, and commentators added to the pressure building inside the palace. Kate's influence became even more pronounced during this period. She helped William navigate the dual challenges of public expectation and internal family dynamics. She advised on messaging, reinforced morale, and ensured that every step forward was strategically sound. Her role, often understated in public coverage, proved critical in maintaining cohesion and focus amid the chaos created by the leak. As the palace moved to contain the situation, a surprising revelation emerged. The leak had also revealed the identity of certain allies within the institution. Those loyal to Charles, those loyal to William, and those whose allegiance remained uncertain were now subtly exposed. This internal realignment would influence not only immediate decisions, but also long-term strategies for succession, governance, and the preservation of royal authority. And here is the cliffhanger that leads us into the next chapter. Just as the palace began implementing its response plan, an unexpected development occurred. A second, even more sensitive leak hinted at details of the king's health and the potential timeline for abdication. This revelation threatened to destabilize the monarchy entirely, forcing both Charles and William to confront a decision far sooner than they had anticipated. While the world watched the monarchy's unfolding drama through headlines, news cycles, and social media speculation, behind the scenes, the Queen Consort was orchestrating a quiet yet critical strategy. Her role, often overlooked in public discourse, was central to maintaining stability, guiding the heir apparent, and safeguarding the dignity of King Charles during this volatile period. Insiders reveal that her approach combined intuition, experience, and strategic foresight, all executed with the subtlety required in a palace accustomed to tradition and discretion. Her influence began in small, almost imperceptible ways. She observed meetings, listened to advisors, and monitored the mood within the household. Where others saw hierarchy and protocol, she saw human behavior, reading subtleties that could signal loyalty, dissent, or vulnerability. The Queen Consort understood that succession was not merely a procedural matter. It was an emotional, psychological, and political process that required careful calibration at every level. One of her first moves was to establish confidential communication channels with Prince William. Recognizing that his preparations had accelerated due to his father's declining health, she provided counsel in ways that were both supportive and directive. She encouraged him to maintain calm under scrutiny, to anticipate potential crises, and to focus on long-term stability rather than short-term panic. Insiders confirmed that her guidance was instrumental in shaping his approach to both public perception and internal family dynamics. The Queen Consort also engaged discreetly with senior advisors and palace officials. She assessed their perspectives, gauged their willingness to adapt to sudden changes, and identified potential risks. Her strategy was subtle yet deliberate. By influencing the decision-making framework without overtly intervening, she ensured that the machinery of the monarchy would continue to function smoothly, even under unprecedented pressure. In essence, she became a linchpin, connecting various factions, reinforcing loyalty, and mitigating potential conflict. Public appearances, though carefully choreographed, were another element of her strategy. Each appearance was designed to convey stability, dignity, and unity, projecting a sense of calm confidence that contrasted sharply with the tension behind the palace doors. Observers noted that her presence provided reassurance not only to the public, but also to members of the royal household, who drew strength from her composed demeanor. She understood the power of perception, that how events were framed publicly could influence both morale and international opinion. Her strategic role extended beyond appearances. She was deeply involved in planning contingencies, from the timing of public statements to the handling of sensitive information leaks. Insiders report that she reviewed communications drafts, suggested phrasing, and considered the ripple effects of each announcement. In a period where every word could trigger speculation or crisis, her input was invaluable in ensuring that the monarchy retained control over its narrative. Family dynamics were a particularly delicate area of focus. She recognized that the abdication process, or even the suggestion of it, could strain relationships within the royal family. Subtle tensions, previously managed through tradition and deference, now required active mediation. She engaged privately with family members, offering counsel, facilitating conversations, and smoothing over potential misunderstandings. Her diplomacy was critical in maintaining cohesion, preventing conflict, and preparing the household for the eventual transfer of responsibilities. Insiders also reveal that the Queen Consort was instrumental in managing the emotional toll on King Charles. While he understood the necessity of potentially stepping aside, the decision carried profound personal and symbolic weight. She provided emotional support, reminded him of his enduring legacy, and helped him frame the choice in terms of duty and the monarchy's long-term stability rather than personal loss. This guidance was subtle, almost invisible, but crucial in ensuring that Charles remained composed and decisive during this tumultuous period. Her strategy also extended to external stakeholders. She liaised with key Commonwealth representatives, diplomats, and trusted political advisors, offering insight into the likely outcomes and ensuring that the transition would be received with measured stability. By anticipating concerns and addressing them discreetly, she minimized potential disruptions and maintained confidence among those with vested interests in the monarchy's continuity. One of the most remarkable aspects of her approach was the balance between visible support and behind-the-scenes influence. In public, she remained composed, dignified, and unwavering. Privately, however, she was a master strategist, subtly guiding decisions, mediating tensions, and preparing both father and son for the reality of an imminent transition. Observers note that this duality, the ability to influence without overtly appearing to do so, is rare and has played a decisive role in maintaining stability during this unprecedented moment. Her influence on William, in particular, cannot be overstated. While his preparations were extensive and meticulous, the Queen Consort offered guidance on timing, messaging, and emotional readiness. She helped him anticipate public reactions, plan contingencies, and balance respect for his father with the necessity of assuming leadership. Insiders describe her role as both mentor and strategist, ensuring that William's ascent, when it occurred, would be both seamless and dignified. And yet, even with this careful orchestration, tension remained. The leak that had shaken the nation earlier created uncertainty about timing, public reaction, and internal family dynamics. The Queen Consort recognized that controlling these variables required constant vigilance, adaptability, and strategic foresight. Every step forward was weighed against potential consequences, and every decision carried the weight of history. By the end of this phase, her strategy had effectively stabilized key elements of the transition. Charles, reassured and supported, was able to focus on decisions with clarity. William, guided and prepared, was poised to step into a role that had shifted from future possibility to immediate responsibility. And the palace, though still navigating challenges, had regained a measure of control over its narrative. And here is the cliffhanger leading into the next chapter. Just as the Queen Consort's strategy began to solidify the household's stability, an unexpected revelation surfaced. A confidential report detailing the king's health deterioration far beyond what had been previously disclosed. This revelation threatened to upend even the most carefully laid plans, forcing the family and advisors to confront a reality that none could ignore. Inside the gilded walls of the palace, tension had reached a fever pitch. Advisors who had spent decades operating in carefully controlled routines now found themselves facing a dilemma they had never anticipated. Should they encourage King Charles to abdicate immediately, or wait and risk further complications? Every option carried enormous consequences, both personal and institutional, and the weight of history pressed heavily on each decision. The dilemma began with a quiet meeting in one of the palace's inner chambers. A select group of senior advisors, including legal experts, communications directors, and long-serving confidants of the king, convened to discuss the implications of recent events. Charles's health, previously considered manageable, was now showing signs of accelerated decline. The earlier leak to the press had intensified pressure, creating public speculation that was impossible to ignore. Every second of delay increased risk, both to the king's well-being and the monarchy's reputation. One of the first points raised in the meeting was the king's physical and mental readiness to continue reigning. While Charles maintained his dignity and composure publicly, internal reports from medical advisors highlighted concerning trends. Fatigue that worsened unpredictably, memory lapses during routine briefings, and difficulty maintaining focus for extended periods. The advisors knew that these issues could affect decision-making at the highest level, potentially leading to missteps in both ceremonial and constitutional matters. The legal team spoke next, framing the question in terms of constitutional responsibility. While the abdication of a British monarch is rare, it is legally permissible under the Royal Marriages Act and related statutes, provided the proper procedures are followed. However, timing and public perception were critical. Too sudden a move could provoke controversy or political scrutiny, while too slow a transition could invite speculation and erode confidence in the monarchy. Every option required a delicate balance of legality, optics, and diplomacy. Communications experts focused on public perception and media management. They stressed that controlling the narrative was paramount. If the king were to abdicate too quickly, the public might interpret it as a failure of leadership or a sign of weakness. If delayed, rumors and speculation could spiral, potentially undermining the authority of both Charles and William. In other words, timing was not just a procedural concern, it was a strategic imperative. Amid these technical discussions, emotional dynamics complicated the picture further. Charles's advisors understood the deep personal and symbolic significance of abdication for him. To step down voluntarily, he would need to reconcile decades of duty, expectation, and personal ambition with the reality of declining health. Advisors debated how best to frame the conversation. Should they emphasize practical necessity,